Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies, America's Bureau Chief of Sport Business, and I'm the host of this weekly podcast. This week, I'll be joined by Gavin Hamilton on his podcast debut to talk about none other than Real Madrid, the world's richest and most successful football club. We'll delve into President Florentino Perez's proposal to sell off an ownership stake to external investors for the first time. We'll discuss how big a stake it could be, how much a sale could raise, and does Real Madrid really need the money? Next, Duncan Griffiths-Nakanishi comes on to present the 2025 edition of The Long Game, Sport Business's big picture look at what comes next for sport and what it could and should be doing to remain at the forefront of culture in the 21st century. After that, we've got Martin Ross to bring us some first-hand information from the Host City 2025 event in Glasgow this week, where he moderated a panel session entitled The America's Decade of Sport. And then we wrap up the main section of the podcast with some key insights from Martin and from Ben Cronin on stadium naming rights in light of the first ever naming rights deal for Hampden Park, the home of Scotland's national team for nearly 120 years. All that and more in just a few moments. But before we start, we'd like to remind you, our listeners, to please leave us your feedback on today's podcast in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms. Let us know if you like what you're hearing and what you'd like to know more about. Now, let's move straight on to our first topic for the day. I'm here now with Gavin Hamilton, our Sport Business Desk Editor. Welcome, Gavin. It's your first time on the podcast. So we can't really ask you what's new because you're new to the podcast, but what have you been doing over the last week? What's been keeping you busy?
Well, I've been back in the office. It's nice to be back in the office because I've been away. I've been down on the south coast actually visiting a relative of mine who's been poorly, and I've been travelling up and down the London to Eastbourne Road, which may sound a little bit Alan Partridge, but I've been on the A22, which is the London to Eastbourne Road, and the A22 is actually the name of the same name as the company that Real Madrid had been using to push their proposals for a European Super League. So even on my days off, I've not been able to avoid European football and all the stories that surround Real Madrid and all the coverage that they attract.
Well, given that's what we're going to talk about, that's very apropos. It was meant to be, wasn't it? You've done a lot of work on football club ownership, and you're here to talk about a subject dear to my heart, as I am a Real Madrid fan. The only La Liga match I've ever been to that I've seen live was in the old Santiago Bernabeu Stadium in the early 90s, where we sat on terraces. Remember those? And we were eating pipas, which are sunflower seeds, and you'd eat the pipas and spit the husks out, and there were piles of sunflower seed husks everywhere. And we did that while watching Real Madrid demolish Tenerife, and that was back when Lorenzo Sanz was the president. So times have certainly changed for Real Madrid. Let's talk about their ownership structure. Just like the 3 other Spanish La Liga clubs, it's owned by 100,000 or so socios or members, which I understand is a non-profit type of structure that's not uncommon in Europe, especially in Germany. What's happening at Real Madrid?
Well, I mean, Real Madrid have always had this famous structure that they share with Barcelona and Athletic Bilbao and also Osasuna. They always get forgotten, a smaller club, but they're part of it's a quartet of teams, of clubs in Spain who are owned by their members, and it's always been sort of, I guess, pushed as a sort of utopian idea of how football club ownership should be, that the members take all the decisions and they're in charge, and you don't get an outsider coming in and taking over the club. But there are also problems with it. I mean, we've seen it becomes quite politicized, the ownership of the club. And you mentioned Lorenzo Sanz, but I mean, Florentino Perez, the current president of Real Madrid, is there because he's won quite a few elections. And they're quite intense affairs, the elections. Candidates make promises about all sorts of things, and often they don't fulfill those promises in office, and it causes problems. And we see with Barcelona, the moment their debts that are piled up in recent years have been caused by promises made by previous presidents who've been trying to win elections. So the whole politicization of the club ownership model can cause problems. And I mean, Real Madrid are still sticking with the ownership model, but they had the annual general meeting last month, and Perez has put forward this idea that he floated a year ago, that Madrid should change their ownership structure and actually bring in external investment, which is a historic change, I think, to the club's structure. And naturally, it's caused a lot of debate. There's going to be an emergency general meeting in a few weeks' time, where the representatives of the members will then be asked to decide on whether to hold a referendum of all the membership. So all the socios around the world will be asked to vote on this change. And if it happens, it will be a significant change, because it's Real Madrid have always been famed for this approach, and they probably, in many ways, they've taken the moral high ground on lots of things by their ownership structure in the way that Barcelona have as well. So it's a big change in the offing, and potentially a lot of things could happen.
And I mean, the case of Real Madrid, they've generated, I think the 2023-24 was when they surpassed the $1 billion mark in terms of revenue generated. And at the time that Barcelona was the only other club, wasn't it? And this year it's projected to host revenues of 1.25 billion. So they're worth a lot. What kind of a stake could be sold? What size of a stake, and how much would it cost?
Well, Perez talked at the AGM. We don't know many details yet. The details are quite sketchy. But Perez said in his address to the meeting that he talked about a hypothetical situation where an investor could come in and buy a 5% stake. So everybody's really looking at a figure of 5%, which doesn't seem like very much. But 5% of Real Madrid, the world's richest club, is a considerable sum of money. If you think of some of the valuations of football clubs in the last couple of years, with Manchester United, where Ineos paid £1.3 billion for a 27% stake. PSG, we've seen Arctos, a US investor, pay €500 million for a 12% stake. So, I mean, Madrid, with the highest revenues of any football club, are in a much stronger position than United and PSG. And so I think we're looking at a huge valuation. I don't think we'd go as far as, say, some of the American valuations that we've seen in recent times, the $10 billion for the LA Lakers earlier this year. But we're getting close to that. So I think we're looking at something north of €6 billion. And, 5% of that is an awful lot of money. We're talking at least, I think, 300 million. So that's a huge potential cash injection for Madrid, and would help Perez, I think, cement his position. I mean, he's already in a very strong position there, but it cements Madrid's position as the dominant force in Spanish football, but also the dominant force in European football.
Mm. I think the burning question is, does Real Madrid actually need that money?
No, but I think you also have to. They don't need the money. They have, as we said, revenues topping €1 billion. I mean, they're top of the Deloitte Money League. Deloitte uses a slightly different measure of revenue. They strip out transfer revenue. It gives probably a more reliable comparison between clubs. But even that, they're on 850 million, ahead of Man City, ahead of PSG, ahead of Manchester United. So they have a lot of money. They won't be worrying about what sort of presents to buy Kylian Mbappe this year. They've got new revenue streams coming in. You mentioned the old stadium and the terraces and how it was back in the day, but that's been redeveloped in recent years, and it's got this amazing new roof. It's got a retractable pitch, a bit like the Tottenham Stadium in London. They're now able to host other sports, music events. They had the NFL there last month, so they've got these new revenue streams on tap. Concerts are a bit of a problem because the local residents have complained about the noise after 11 o'clock. And if you know the Santiago Bernabéu Stadium, it's in a very exclusive part of Madrid. It's not in a rundown area. It's in a very exclusive area close to the financial district. Lots of well-to-do residents, and they've complained about the music, but I think they will overcome that problem. But maybe a few tickets to the locals will be made available. But I think that's another revenue stream for them, and they're in a very strong position. But I think also with Real Madrid, you have to remember that their rivalry with Barcelona determines a lot of what they do, because it's the most intense sporting rivalry, I think, anywhere in the world. So they tend to do things to stop Barcelona doing them. And Barcelona are really the club that need that cash injection. But it's going to be an interesting time for Barcelona. Do they now copy Real Madrid, their great rivals, or do they just really take a more determined stance and say, we're not going down that road, and take the moral high ground? The moral high ground may mean that their debts continue and they find it harder and harder to compete financially and commercially with Real Madrid.
Mm. Yeah, you talk about the rivalry, and of course it's real and everybody knows about it. I watched the last Clásico in a bar near Barcelona, and I was sort of secretly celebrating every time a goal was scored. But to see the devastation on people's faces, and it's, as it says in the Nou Camp, it's more than a club. It means so much to them. And if you know the history of Spain, it really is deeply embedded in every Catalan's DNA, how important this club is. So it's interesting to see. I wonder what Barcelona will do now that they've invested so much in their new stadium renovation. But going back to Madrid, where does this selling a stake, where would it leave Real Madrid and the A22 European Super League project?
Well, A22 are this strange company, really, because they don't have much of a public face. They're very hard to contact and get details from, but they keep pushing this plan for a Super League. I think we're now contractually obliged to call it the failed Super League plan because it's been discredited by so many people. And originally, it wasn't a group of 22. Far from it. It was probably a group of about 13 clubs that were behind it. The 6 English Premier League clubs dropped out pretty quickly. The Italians, Milan and Inter dropped out, and Juventus hung in there for a little while until the ownership board changed a couple of years ago. And it was really Barcelona, Real Madrid and Juventus who were left still backing the plans, and Juventus have dropped out, and Barcelona now have moved back to UEFA and the European clubs camp, leaving Real Madrid really on their own, and they're very isolated, but they're still pushing this idea. They're still backing the legal challenge that A22 have put forward and been very successful within the Spanish courts, and they've won cases against UEFA. So this whole thing is sort of lurking in the background. UEFA have always been very competent in managing the interests of the big clubs. And this whole threat of a Super League has been around, really since the mid-90s. And UEFA have always accommodated the interests of the big clubs when they've renegotiated every cycle of new rights, and they've kept everybody on board. But A22 have made a very good point, I think, and one that's very valid and UEFA find very difficult to deal with, which is that UEFA, there's this inherent contradiction in what UEFA do, in that they are the regulator of European football. They make up the rules that everybody has to follow, but they're also the organizer of its biggest competition, the Champions League. And so they're caught in this dilemma. They've had a dilemma this year with Barcelona and Chelsea breaking financial regulations, and they really should have kicked them out of the competition, expelled them or suspended them for a year, and yet they've given them a slap on the wrist fine and allowed them to carry on the competition because they can't afford to kick out their biggest assets. So there's an inherent contradiction that I think will develop over the years, and we may see, I think, certainly calls from certain clubs in Europe, and A22 will try and push this idea that UEFA should move away from being the commercial operator. And we may see something like we see in Formula One where, the FIA make the rules and there's a commercial body actually running the sport. That's something that might develop over the coming years, but I think that's probably a discussion for another day.
Well, I know that any discussion of the Super League will certainly have our good friend, Mr. Javier Tebas, up in arms. He's been very vocal about it in the past, hasn't he? And come to blows with Real Madrid. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But that's a really good overview of what's going on with Real Madrid. Thank you, Gavin, for coming on. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you in future podcasts. And we are going to take a short break now before we move on to section 2, where we talk about the long game, sport business's big picture look at what comes next for sport. We'll be right back.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest and among the most insightful analyses of the key issues facing the sports business industry. I'm pleased to have Duncan Griffiths-Nakanishi, our managing editor for Reports and Partnerships, back on the line with me. Duncan, it's been far too long. You were last on here back in July when we published our bumper report on global cricket. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, great to be back. It's been a busy second half of the year. Lots of reports have been going out. Glad to be back on, making my second appearance.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Before we dive into the subject at hand, can you tell me how many reports we're at this year so far? Because you've only been on the job since earlier in 2025, and also we published a load of reports. How many are we at?
Yeah. Part of me wants to say 50, but I know it's less than that. But that's in my head. That's the volume it feels like I've been going through. At more accurate figures, probably 11 reports. So this year alone, we've done in-depth reports about cricket, golf, stadium naming rights, private equity, US college sport, and we just published the last report of 2025, which is on motorsport. So covered a lot, and it's been a big year for reports.
And I wanted to ask you about that specifically because you've joined, as I said, you've joined Sport Business recently after an impressive few years in the publishing and creative content sectors across tech, marketing, data analysis, and other areas. So in your professional capacity in the industry, what stands out for you about the Sport Business reports as a tool for executives in our industry? Why are they as good as they are?
That's a really good question. I mean, I would say that the thing that stands out to me is how comprehensive the reports are and how we kind of leave no stone unturned in terms of trying to get the data that we need to make it a really valuable report. So we obviously have a lot of data that exists on our rights trackers for media and sponsorship. But when we come to report, often we need to kind of get more data and look at different areas that we don't have figures for and data for. And the kind of process we go through to get that data to make sure that we're creating something really valuable and new is very impressive. And I think that is what stands out. And of course, we have the analysis, which, puts that data into context, which is very valuable. But I think, how comprehensive they are. I mean, anyone who's purchased one and seen the scope of them will know how these are really big pieces of work. And I think that's what makes them stand out.
Well, I would agree with that. I think I've done 3 so far: tennis, golf, and cricket. And they've each been between sort of 80 and 100 pages full of data and charts and analysis and insight from key industry executives. So they do cover every base, don't they? They're a wonderful thing. And we're here today to talk about the latest report from Sport Business. Not necessarily a report. It's called The Long Game, which is essentially Sport Business's big picture look at what comes next for sport. And I've had a quick glance at this year's edition, and I can't wait to get stuck in, actually. The writing is superb. The questions asked are spot on and really thought-provoking. And it's also a really fun read. So can you tell me a little bit about The Long Game and what the main themes are that emerged from this year's edition?
So The Long Game, to keep it short, is a platform we've been building since 2024. I've only been here a year, but I think it was originally devised as a way for us to kind of get out the day-to-day, news of sport, which we cover well. We cover, the accuracy and the information of what's happening in the industry. This is a chance for us to look a little bit further ahead and be speculative in what we talk about. So that obviously, as you say, I think fun is quite an important word there because it gives us a chance to talk about things that we can't in our day-to-day journalism. We can be bolder, more opinionated, and essentially look at what sport could and should become to remain really at the forefront of culture, which is obviously a topic that's, everyone who works at sport business is very passionate about. So, it's an open question: how can sport remain relevant and at the forefront of culture? And that means there's so many different places it can go to. So for this year's edition, obviously we have a compass of topics that we think are really relevant based on, internal research and the insight of our editorial team. But quite interesting, actually, as I kind of started working on the project, what really evolved and became clear was there was this kind of dichotomy between 2 of sports' key stakeholders, the 2 most important, really, the athlete and the fan. And it is this kind of relationship between them and the different priorities of each, which I think was clearest. So when it comes to the athlete, we have pieces on whether they will ever truly have a say in sports governance. I think Frank Dunn did that piece. He obviously is a regular podcast guest. We look at their role as investor in athlete syndicates and query where that might end up. And we look at the way that they're increasingly taking control of the negotiation process when it comes to working out their value. Really fascinating piece from Thomas Van Schaik, looking at things like, athletes using no-code tools to plot their brand value and how it changes day to day. So when they come to actually negotiating with clubs and sponsors, they have a really good idea of what their worth is. So that's really interesting from an athlete point of view. And then for the fan, obviously fandom is an evergreen topic for The Long Game. We're always talking about what fans want, their shifting priorities and interests. And this year, we have kind of a variety of pieces which all tackle it implicitly in different ways. So we dig into Dream 11's success in India and fantasy gaming, which obviously is now curtailed in the regulations, but that story of its success, there's lots of learnings that we've taken from that Mike Jakeman has written about. We show why F1's growth is really dependent on its female fans and how it needs to adapt and change the way it does things to really, capitalize on that interest that female fans have in F1 and motorsport in general. And then we critique the way that, women's marketing in sport, and then we critique the apparent sanitization of women's sport marketing in certain sports and why it's not properly serving fans and speaking to them on their level. Another really interesting piece from Karis Hustad, who is a strategist at Pacer. So I think obviously that you have those 2 sides of the argument, well, not argument, but 2 sides of sport and the playing field. And I suppose to draw maybe a slightly crude unifying thread, I think the question posed is, are rights holders going to cater to these 2 stakeholders? and listen to their needs and actually give them what they want or demand? Or is that control going to be wrestled from rights holders' grasp? Can it be wrestled from their grasp? And what are the ways that both the athlete and the fan are making changes to try and take that back into their own hands, I suppose. So yeah, really fascinating stuff.
That is really interesting. And I am very interested in the whole aspect of marketing to women, especially in light of Sky's efforts to put out the women's channel,
Yes.
Halo. I'm sure that was talked about, but Halo was on for
Yeah.
3 days before they realized they'd made a mistake in their approach. So I think, these companies need to do a lot more homework before they do something like this, don't they? Interesting. Well, among all the features in the long game, which feature or pieces surprised you the most?
Yeah. So I'm going to be careful not to show my ignorance too much here. There's a piece on Roblox by Joe Redfern, which I found really enlightening. I mean, I know the platform, I'm aware of it, but before I read the piece, I wasn't really aware of the engagement levels it has with young people and what people are able to do on that platform when it comes to creating their own games. Her piece essentially argues that is really the breeding ground of where the next sport format might come from. I mean, she's a big believer in that being the kind of hotbed of creative talent, and if there's going to be a new multi-billion-dollar sport format, it's going to come from Roblox. That was really surprising to me. And the other one, I guess I've already mentioned it, is around athletes and the fact they are using all these new tools to track their own value, and they have that control now where they can see, if they have a particularly good performance, here's where their, I guess, stock level is at. And then that gives them the power when they then go and speak to brands, sponsors, negotiate a new contract, that they can say, oh, actually, I know how much I'm worth, and it's maybe more than you're suggesting. So it kind of makes you question whether agents are really going to be needed going forward.
That's interesting. I'm interested in the Roblox thing. I remember asking when the Canadian Premier League was doing its marketing for this year, I asked them what their Roblox strategy was, and it was like a blank look. What's that? And I have heard from many different sides that it is really important. And like you, it's like doesn't really resonate with me, but I know it's important. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
Yeah, I mean, the front cover of the publication, I mean, I should mention it is in print and it's online. So it's a printed publication, which is, I think, a really nice, tangible thing. The front cover is a very graphic search and find style illustration, and it has lots of Roblox on there. Actually, my son, who's only 3, spent, maybe 5 minutes just looking at the front cover, looking at all the Roblox characters. So I guess that speaks to maybe that, Gen Alpha being drawn to those kind of characters.
Gosh, wow. It is quite a beautiful publication. It's something that I have on my coffee table. Not that it's a coffee table book like you know them traditionally to be, but it's something that captures people's attention, whether they're 3 or 100. But moving along, while you were editing this, did you pick out any specific trends that our listeners would be interested in hearing about?
Yeah, one thing that came up a couple of times was this idea of multi-use stadium development. So we did a piece with Populous all around this topic and how, any stadiums being developed now have to have this multi-use inherently baked into the functionality of the development. It has to be there, has to be a daily venue where people go to. And then we also did a piece with Malcolm Lemons, who is the editor of the Vetted newsletter. And we were talking about athlete syndicates and where that might go. He mentioned that real estate and stadium development is really the area where he thinks it's basically the biggest opportunity or untapped opportunity for athletes and investment. And the fact that these venues will become, there'll be much more opportunity for athletes to kind of co-brand spaces around the venue where they can have pop-up shops or whatever the case may be. And investment will increasingly go to that rather than necessarily tech or, wearables or food and drink where it historically has been.
It's really important to get people from outside our little bubble of sports media, sports business, weighing in on this, isn't it? I remember speaking to our CEO, Paul Rossi at Sportel, and he told me how he'd spoken to someone about how so many children these days are being brought up by their grandparents because both their parents work. And so these children are they're absorbing the values of an older generation, and how that's something that marketers, including in the sports business industry, need to look at. And the other side of that is, boomers are living till they're 100, and so ignore them at your peril in your marketing, in sport and everything else. So it's really important to look outside the box, isn't it? And on that note, what do you think the value of taking a long-term view in the sports industry is right now?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that would really benefit people to taking that long-term view. One is, revenue models. I mean, it's obvious, but there's always new revenue models that are emerging. And I think when you look at some of these pieces, you see the way that certain leagues or properties or companies are really innovating to diversify what they're doing in terms of bringing in money. We did a piece on, the new football's new formats, the likes of Kings League, Baller League, etc., and how they're obviously prioritizing distribution over media rights fees and basically what's in it for the brands involved. And I guess that's a good example of, thinking a little bit more laterally about how to bring in money to your company or your sport. I also think that it's not often you get the chance to really think about things which maybe might not happen. So a lot of the views expressed in the long game are quite speculative. They're quite bold. There's probably some stuff in here that you're going to disagree with, which I think is also fine. I think having those things which make you think, oh, I actually don't agree with that, that provocation kind of leads you to other conclusions which might benefit your work. And just being in the weeds of the day-to-day, I think having the chance to look at these broader, more speculative ideas can kind of help you shape what you do day to day and mean that you're not so reactive to stuff as it happens, because you're kind of thinking about these long-term trends and what might be about to happen.
I think that's very true for pretty much every aspect of life, isn't it? Looking at all sides of the question and considering what other people might think that's different from you. I think that's really important. Well, Duncan, that's great. How can people get the long game?
So it's available online now. The website's been published. It's at longgame.sportbusiness.com. And obviously it's in print as well. So you might work for a company where it's been sent to your door. It might be sitting in a package somewhere in your reception. It might already be on a coffee table. Hopefully it's not being used to prop up any tables already. But if you're also interested, if it hasn't come to your office and you want to get a copy, just get in touch with Sport Business and we'll be happy to send you out a copy.
Great. Okay. Well, what I do like about it, what you said, is that the long game, the writers in it, and the editor indeed himself are not afraid to be bolder and more opinionated, which is much like the podcast. And it allows us to, express things which we might not otherwise be able to do in one of our analyses or articles. So that's a fantastic introduction. Thank you, Duncan, for coming on. And I'm sure we'll have you back to talk about our next major report. And for now, we're going to take a short break before we move on to our next bold and opinionated section. And we'll be back in a few moments. Thank you.
What's coming next for sport? Explore the long game, Sport Business's annual deep dive into the forces shaping the future of the industry. Find out more at longgame.sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Weekly podcast, where I've got podcast regular Martin Ross, our global news editor, on the line with me. Welcome, Martin.
Hello, Catherine. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Now, you've had an extraordinarily busy week, not just with the usual task of staying on top of the latest industry news and producing your best-in-class analysis, but you were out and about at Glasgow's Technology and Innovation Centre, where you moderated a panel session at the Host City 2025 event. Martin, give us a bit of colour. What is Host City and who goes to it?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Host City is an event and, it's a major events hosting conference, if you like. It brings together major international federations with prospective event hosts. That's the kind of rationale behind it, but also suppliers that work in between. It's hosted in Glasgow every year. Obviously, as you can imagine, the Scottish Event Scotland up here is heavily involved, and those working around the Commonwealth Games. So it's been a sort of regular staple on the calendar. Every year we go along, well, I go along. It brings together speakers, and then there's breakout sessions and workshops and some good Scottish food. Lots of calories. So speakers involved this year, Ugur Erdner, who's the Sport Accord president. There was Rob Still and Pierre Trochet, who are the president of Modern Pentathlon, which we've spoken about, and International Federation of American Football. Harvey Goldsmith was there, who's an English sort of performing arts promoter. Phil Batty, CEO of Glasgow 2026, and Paul Bush, very famous name up here in the events hosting sector. He was head of Event Scotland for a long time and is now managing director of the Grand Départ Tour de France in Edinburgh, which will be in 2027.
And the panel that you moderated, the America's Decade of Sport, Opportunities for International Federations and Suppliers. What were the key takeaways from that? And can you tell us about what some of the panelists said? I think it was the NFL's Brett Gosper and Deloitte's David Grevemberg were both speaking.
Yeah, so we had 5 people on the panel, 6 including me as a moderator. So yeah, Brett Gosper was there, David Grevemberg, who works as a games delivery exec for Deloitte Tech, D-Tech for LA28. We also had trio coming over from the States, Marty Kendrick, who's the CEO and exec director Harris County Sports for the NRG Stadium in Houston, a World Cup venue. Lynn Young, the commissioner of, and this is a hard word to say, Semi-Quincentennial Commission, basically the America 250 celebrations next year. And also Consuelo Sanchez, who's the deputy director of tourism, Florida Sports Coast. So we had a real kind of melting pot of different people talking about different angles. What we tried to do during a lot of the session really was to nail down what they thought and what the sentiment is around bringing your event to the US as a stakeholder, as a federation. How do you do it well? Kind of looked maybe at the example of the T20 Cricket World Cup, which in the US, co-hosted the US last year, which in many ways you could say was a success in that the sort of diaspora expat market in the US really bought into it. India, Pakistan, however, was the only match sold out. So did you really tap into the wider market there? Not sure that they did. How do you do that? You know, we talked about content that you can provide. We talked about ad spend. We talked about whether you can get onto major broadcast network. And then I put the question to Brett, who in his former life was chief executive of World Rugby. And during that time brought events, you know, I'm at the Sevens World Cup to San Francisco 7 years ago, and this was a whole kind of precursor to building up rugby really in the US, which will now host the men's and women's Rugby World Cup. So I asked him about that strategy from his point of view, whether it worked, how difficult it was, and then he also made some comments as well about how the NFL goes about it from the flip side in terms of taking a major of the number one US sports property and trying to export it around the rest of the world. And this was his answer.
I think it's a difficult market to break into is the easy thing, and you need a big rock in that pond to make a difference. And I think it takes a World Cup. I think, you know, Sevens World Cup, while Olympic sport and the US were actually doing quite well at the time, probably didn't make a dent in the market at that time. We got full crowds at the Giant Stadium in San Francisco over 3 days. It was a great event. We all felt good about it. But did it move the needle in that market? Probably not. So for football, which is obviously moving its needle in the States, be it reasonably slowly, I think the FIFA World Cup will have a huge impact, and it will be interesting. The NFL hold half of the sports rights in the United States, so the Premier League hold half of the sports rights in the United Kingdom. And so we'll know straight away what sort of effect it's had on our bottom line as we go forward and negotiate rights in the future. But we feel, I think we feel there's room for growth. There's room for a number of sports in that market. That's why it's so interesting. But I think you've got to do something significant. And, we debate the same on this side of the pond as well. Is 1 game a year or 7 games in Europe or 8 games outside of the United States, regular season games, is that enough to create the ripple effect in those markets? And it's a debate we have inside. Will we go 16 games? Will that create more ripple?
So some quite telling thoughts there from Brett. I kind of put the same question to David Grevemberg, who was chief executive at Glasgow 2014, the Commonwealth Games here, then moved obviously on to the Commonwealth Games Federation, is American himself. He's from Louisiana. He's worked at IPC, he's worked for USA Wrestling. So he came at it maybe from a slightly different angle in terms of really how you tell the story, but then also how you focus in on that diaspora, and actually brought up an example close to my heart, which is Scottish Rugby and the opportunities that they have. He has clearly got experience of this from the Commonwealth Games when they tried to tap into the US market, not a Commonwealth Games nation, clearly. So yeah, I put it to him, same kind of question, but he had a slightly different spin on it. And yeah, let's hear from David on the panel session.
You can't just take a top-down approach and just pop an event and then bring the circus to town and it leaves and expect everyone to say, oh, we're going to go practice that sport and it's going to be part of our community. You really have to appeal to the sense of identity, being, and belonging. And I really think that all these events, it's been said several times that the United States is this real melting pot. It's so diverse. And so how you appeal to the identity, being, and belonging of the fan base, and then create a compelling circus that people really feel that they can connect immersively to is critical. You look at rugby. So I sit on the board of SRU and have learned so much over the past 3 years that I've been in that place. Fascinating opportunity. Team Ireland has made an amazing push, and they're obviously it helps with the performance of the team. But they resonate in terms of rugby in the States. Are able to do amazing pull in terms of not only fan base but also revenue generation and so forth. There is such a strong. If you look at Scotland, there's such a strong Scottish base in terms of places of origin and descendants of Scotland in the U.S. that is virtually untapped. And for both the FIFA World Cup as well as the 2 Rugby World Cups that are coming to the States, I think there's an enormous opportunity to, again, work with public-private third sector here in Scotland with public-private third sector in the United States to really appeal to those places of origin and really bring in a new fan base to a new, and sport is that catalyst. So I think looking at those things, both top down from an event standpoint and bottom up from that sense of identity, being and belonging, there's a number of breadcrumbs that can really lead to an increased fan base.
So some key takeaways from Glasgow here. We do like a takeaway in Glasgow, incidentally, as I am walking proof of that. But yeah, slightly different week for me this week, putting my hosting an events hat on, and I enjoyed it. It was good fun.
Well, thank you, Martin. You generally do manage to bring in an audio clip or two, and they always add depth to the podcast. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I believe that you're going to stay on the line for the next part of the podcast. We're going to bring in Ben Cronin, our global sponsorship editor, but we're going to take a short break before that. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with trusted news, data, and analysis across media rights, sponsorship, and more. Explore our subscription options at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the final section of the Sport Business Podcast. Martin has remained on the line with me, and I brought Ben Cronin, our global sponsorship editor, into the conversation to build on previous podcast discussions about stadium naming rights. Now, Ben's team at Sport Business Sponsorship has covered a number of stadium rights deals in just the past few weeks, while Martin wrote a story this week about Barclays, the British multinational bank, being named by the Scottish FA as the first ever naming rights sponsor of Glasgow's Hampden Park, home of Scotland's national team. Now, of course, Hampden is dear to your heart, Martin, not least because it was the venue for Scotland's dramatic 4-2 win over Denmark 2 weeks ago, which secured them World Cup qualification for the first time in nearly 30 years. So tell us about the significance of this deal, how it came about, and what it will involve.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. It came out of the blue a bit, out of the navy blue. Scotland are kind of riding on an all-time high at the moment in terms of qualifying, an all-time high in terms of qualifying. There's slightly juxtaposition there. But yeah, you may have seen the goals a few weeks ago. They've obviously used this as a reason to perhaps announce it during this window when there's been a lot of viral clips of the national team. I think we've got, fair to say we've got a couple of stars in our team, maybe the first time in a long time. So yeah, first ever naming rights sponsor for Hampden. It's been able to come about, and we'll use it really as a kind of jumping off point, maybe to talk about the wider stadium naming rights market in the UK, because it's certainly not going to be among the most valuable, but it is significant. Barclays were, I believe, looking for a kind of UK sponsorship of this type and approached the SFA, or specifically approached Scottish Football Marketing, which is a joint operation between the SFA, the men's SPFL, and the women's SWPL. And yeah, that's how that, approached them. I don't think there was an agency involved, and the deal came about. Now, SFA is able to do this. They were tenants of Hampden for a long, long time. Queen's Park, an amateur club previously, used to own Hampden, sold it to the SFA for £5 million about 5 years ago. So yeah, the deal has been done. Is it controversial? A little bit. I mean, Hampden, for anybody who doesn't know, is a very kind of iconic stadium. They played there since 1906 on the current site, Scotland. Glasgow hosted the first ever football international ever between Scotland and England in 1872. Not at Hampden, but at a cricket club actually in the west of Glasgow. Anyway, I won't bore you with all the history. The 7-3 Real Eintracht game, a record attendance of 149,415 in 1937 between England and Scotland, British record. So all of this, does it mean it's massively controversial? Will people use the name? I think because Scotland are doing pretty well at the moment, there's not been much backlash. The fans generally have been, the reaction has been now that the SFA must be rolling in it, I think is what most people are saying, because they've qualified for the World Cup and now because of this naming rights deal. Maybe not quite correct, but yeah, all in all, quite a significant development for a venue that has had a naming rights sponsor of a stand, but never of the whole stadium.
Ben, I want to bring you in now, but first of all, welcome back to the show. You're becoming quite a regular on the podcast, aren't you?
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I'm on every week now. People are going to be getting bored of me.
Oh, I hardly
the numbers
think so.
geek.
But
we like a numbers geek.
Exactly. Yeah, just the data drone.
Well, in that sense, can you give us some context on this deal, how the value compares perhaps with other UK stadium naming rights deals, and who is getting a good deal?
We've heard that it's within 20% of £1 million per annum. So if that is accurate, I was struck by how low the figure is, especially considering it also includes rights to men's and women's Scottish Cup competition, and there's also a girls' grassroots football programme included in it. I suppose that's related to the difficulty of naming an existing venue rather than a new one. It's also probably a symptom of the fact that it's not a complete takeover. They've retained the Hampden name, which is similar to what's happened with Wembley. You've got Wembley by EE. You've also got some very sort of well-established stadiums in the US where they haven't got rid of the original name altogether. There's the Kansas City Chiefs Stadium is called Gayer Field at Arrowhead Stadium. So there are examples of that. I think the fee is probably driven by the fact that there's not going to be that many games. I mean, Martin's probably better placed to comment on this than me, but I'd imagine you've got your international matches, your cup finals, and then you've got some summer concerts. So I don't know, Martin. You live in Glasgow,
semi-finals as well for League Cup and Scottish Cup. Concert-wise, yeah, we've had Coldplay, Ed Sheeran, Pink, and Take That. I think I've been here in recent years, but it's only a handful every year. If I was to open my window and there was a match on, you would probably hear the crowd. And I have done that when there's been a match and Celtic scored a winner in the last minute of the cup final. I turned my television off in disgust, and I heard the Celtic chants flowing through my window. So, yeah, it's literally that close. But, yeah, Ben makes a really good point. Compared to, and maybe we could chat a little bit about English Premier League deals, they're getting much more inventory every 2 weeks. This is far less frequent. And, yeah, it has hosted big matches, obviously, at the Euros, London 2020 Olympics, UEFA Champions League finals. But when it hosts those, you have to give up your naming rights sponsor. So, yeah, the inventory in that sense is quite limited.
Martin, while you're at it, what I really want to know is whether you are going to call it Barclays Hampden or not.
It's a 100% no, I'm afraid, on that. And anybody I know and anybody going to the games will not call it Barclays Hampden. Partly, I mean, as Ben really makes a very good point, they've retained Hampden in the name, so they've given you the option of, because it would have been hugely controversial if they got rid of it. We've had the conversation before about obviously new venues do get recognition for naming rights, but if you're giving a name to a new venue, no. We're sticking the muds here. I don't see anybody really using it. However, if I think about how well Scottish Rugby Union and Murrayfield did with how much pickup BT Murrayfield got, and that wasn't really so much fans calling it BT Murrayfield, it was the players in every single interview that were trained to say BT Murrayfield, and they also did a pretty good job getting the press to call it BT Murrayfield. So that will be where the value is, I think, in terms of media recognition. But yeah, as an existing venue with such a strong name as Hampden, I don't think so, unless it's a new one, or if I think in Dublin of a sort of completely rebuilt Lansdowne Road, which became the Aviva Stadium. You go to Dublin, they do call it the Aviva. You talk to people, they say you're going to the Aviva. Older guys maybe still call it Lansdowne Road, but I think that would get more recognition. Here, no, that's a pretty firm no, I think, among most fans.
Yeah. Well, whether it's Barclays Hampden or not, or just Hampden, what are the similarities between this and other stadium rights deals that you know of?
There's a lot of similarities between this deal and a lot of stadium naming deals. It seems like it's supporting a local operation. As Martin said in his story, Barclays have just opened a new financial hub next to the River Clyde in Glasgow, which is supposed to house 5,000 staff. Whether or not it will in these days of kind of hybrid working remains to be seen. But yeah, that's quite a common play in a lot of these stadium deals. You see it also with Brighton and American Express. They've got a European headquarters in Brighton, and they're not using the team to grow brand awareness. They're American Express. Everybody already knows about them, but they're using that stadium naming deal to make local people and local employees feel good about them and their position in the community. And I'd imagine there's a similar thing going on in this deal. And it's also prevalent in the US as well. We did some research into the NFL stadium rights market at the start of the year. And we found out that 2/3 of the sponsors, the stadium naming sponsors in the league, are actually from the same state as the stadium and the team that they're sponsoring. So there's a kind of a common theme there, which is, sponsoring your local team.
Well, we've seen some momentum in the UK stadium naming rights market after Everton, Twickenham, and now this. What's coming next? And do you think naming rights deals could be a means of softening the betting sponsorship ban?
Definitely, yeah. I have a feeling we're going to see a few more stadium naming deals. Everton has kind of set the template. I mean, not only in the sense that they're earning new revenues from the stadium naming deal, but because they developed a new stadium, they're also going to be able to sell other bits of inventory within the new venue. I think teams that aren't building new stadiums, sort of lower down the pyramid in the Premier League, they're going to have a big financial hit, as you say, from the betting ban. So one thing that they possibly could do is bundle together stadium inventory with a shirt deal to retain value. And I think it would be easier to communicate that to your fan base. If you're saying we're taking a massive hit on the fact that we're no longer going to have these betting brands, so you're going to have to suck up a stadium naming deal. I think that might be easier for these clubs. I think it will take a bit of finessing. So one of the ways around this is that the way they've done it at Wembley, where they've got Wembley presented by EE. Barclays Hampden is a sort of different model where the brand name goes before the original name, but it's a way of sort of softening the blow as far as fan groups are concerned. Another thing is it helps if you can build a new venue because you've got a completely clean slate. There's no kind of brand equity or there's no history built up in a venue. So you've got a fresh slate and an opportunity to go with a new name, which is what's happened with Everton. And that could be the case with Man United when they build a new stadium. It'd be interesting to see whether they go down the naming rights approach or whether they just decide to name a stand, an individual stand within the new building.
Ben, I mean, we talk about we've been slightly critical, I suppose, of the value here, but when I think about it, and we think about Everton, which I believe £6 million a year is kind of ballpark,
roughly speaking,
for much more inventory. I mean, I think clearly Barclays have seen an opportunity here. I think it may be slightly tied, obviously, to, as you mentioned, the big hub that they have here. But to my mind, it's an opportunity they've seen in the market at a price that's, decent, clearly. But I don't think it would stack up that badly. I mean, at the other end, you look at Twickenham, which I think had a lot of press recently for the 10 million per year deal with Allianz, which maybe not getting a huge amount of inventory for that. So, yeah. Maybe they are. I mean, clearly we're a smaller market here than down in London as well, or English Premier League clubs. So perhaps it is.
Yeah, I think a lot of UK stadium deals are lower than you would expect. The Arsenal deal is, from what I've heard, is a lot lower because it's bundled into the shirt deal with the Emirates brand. I think that's probably driven by the number of events that these stadiums can host. And I think that might be the case with Hampden as well. There's sort of noise pollution issues. It's in the case of the US venues, you've got the potential to host more concerts over the course of a year. They're often in sort of bigger cities and they're more capable of having those sort of mitigating those noise issues because they're not in built up areas. I mean, that is a sweeping generalization, but I think a lot of sort of inner city stadiums in the UK possibly do suffer from not having that year-round catalogue of events. And ironically, the one venue in London that does have a full roster of events, Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, it's got the NFL, it's got Tottenham, it's also got, an F1 racing track and lots of other things, has struggled to find a naming sponsor. So it's a strange science.
Well, the London Olympic Park's naming rights are also on the market, Ben, but that's curious in that it doesn't actually include London Stadium. What can you tell me about that?
So yeah, they've actually, we reported they were very close to doing a deal with Allianz, and Allianz ultimately decided to sponsor Twickenham. So they're really the sort of Cinderella stadium of UK sport. They've been looking for a sponsor for a very long time. We reported they've just appointed this agency called the Superlative Group to help them identify a sponsor. I think so. They're reframing the sponsorship search. They're actually looking for a sponsor for the whole of the Olympic Park now, and I think that's because they think it's more valuable if they do it that way. So the London Stadium is bundled into a wider package of assets, although interestingly, they refer to the Aquatic Centre as a standalone entity. I think potentially one of the reasons they're doing that is because if they get a standalone sponsor for the London Stadium, they have to share some of the revenues with West Ham, whereas if they get something for the Olympic Park, they get to keep more for themselves. That's my theory anyway about why they might be doing it. But yeah, that search goes on. It's been, if you think about it, it's 13 odd years now that they've been looking for a stadium naming sponsor there. And the longer it goes on, the harder it gets because it becomes synonymous with the quest for a naming sponsor. So yeah, whether or not a brand wants to sort of associate with it, they'll have misgivings. They'll think, well, why hasn't another brand gone for this option?
All right. Well, I think we've looked into that very thoroughly. Thank you both. Superb analysis as usual, and I'd expect nothing less of you. Now, you're both going to stay with me for our final section where we cast our glances to what's coming up in the week ahead, but we're going to take a short break first. Stay with us. We'll be back with you in just a minute.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the final section of the Sport Business Podcast. Martin, Ben, and I are here on the line, and we're going to look ahead to the coming week and bring you some fun and quirky bits of news from around the industry. Now, gentlemen, I'm going to go first with an upcoming event that's dear to my heart as a reconverted fan of the Vancouver Whitecaps, who are off to their first ever Major League Soccer Cup final on Saturday. Now, they're playing at the Chase Stadium, formerly the Drive Pink Stadium in Fort Lauderdale. And what is interesting is that there's going to be a live watch party at BC Place in Vancouver. And it looks like the audience for this live watch party could dwarf the actual in-stadium crowd at Chase Stadium in Fort Lauderdale, which is something you wouldn't expect. Chase Stadium is sold out for the final. There's 21,550 tickets sold, I believe. And BC Place is likely to have about 25,000 tickets. So more people watching it on big screens in a stadium thousands of miles away than actually on location. Now, I've got a couple of quiz questions for you two. First of all, I want you to guess what a ticket would cost to watch on a big screen at BC Place right now compared to an actual ticket if you were to go online and buy one for Chase Stadium for the MLS Cup final. Any ideas of what the spread is here? What would a BC Place ticket cost to watch on the screen?
Canada dollars or US dollars?
Well, US.
$10.
Very good. It's $10.75, the equivalent of. But if you wanted to go and watch the live game, what would you have to shell out right now?
Is it? How are they doing it? Are there different tiers of tickets? Or?
Well, the cheapest ticket is going for
$200.
I'm going to $427.
Right down the middle. It's $317 is the cheapest ticket, US. So actually, it's probably a better deal to just fly to Vancouver and watch the game.
So these are resale tickets, are they? Second black market?
Chase Stadium's resale and BC Place is just 15 Canadian dollars to go in and watch it. And they bring down the big screens in the middle, so it's like watching on the biggest TV screen ever. And you can have a beer. There's lots of people, the tifos. It'd be good fun actually to go and watch it there.
Can I throw a quiz question back at you before you ask your other one?
Yeah, go on.
When was the last time, and there's a reason I know this, but when was the last time the Whitecaps won, well, let's say the top tier North American League, because it wasn't the MLS?
It was the NASL,
Yes.
And I get mixed up with my dates. I think it was 1979.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Very good. And the reason I know that is they had an ex-Rangers legend, actually, Willie Johnson, who's playing that season, and there's a very famous clip, people can go and have a look, of him going over to take a corner, and the fan gives him a beer, and he takes a swig of his beer, gives him the beer back, crosses the corner, and the guy headers it in. It's very of its time. It's very cool.
That sounds like the Mo Salah integration where he picks up the phone the Google
it's just
Pixel at the end. Yeah, but
slightly
probably
more
less
old-fashioned
considered than
version
that.
of it.
Yeah.
Well, the second question I have is the Whitecaps are the first team in the modern era of Major League Soccer to reach every final of the cup competitions it's participated in the same calendar year. Do you know what those cup competitions are?
Whoa. No.
Well, the one that they're playing in on Saturday is one of them because it's called a cup.
Well, they've not been. They were in the
MLS
CONCACAF Cup Champions Cup final this year.
Yeah.
Was that one of them?
Yep.
Wow.
They were in the final and they're in the MLS Cup. That's two. There's
Yeah.
one more. Come on.
Liga MX?
It's called
that's
Liga
Mexican,
MX. I know this from
Yep.
previous episodes.
Ah.
Think FA Cup.
Oh, the Canadian FA Cup.
That's right, the Canadian Championship. So they're the only Major League Soccer team to reach all their cup competition finals, which is quite an accomplishment.
Doesn't
And
say
the
much for
final
the
one is-
competitiveness of Canadian soccer.
Well, you say that. They haven't.
Says the Scottish man.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, it's
Good
either
point, good point.
Glasgow or Celtic every year.
Okay, now
More
I've got
Celtic recently.
a final question for you. Which of the two teams in the MLS Cup, Vancouver Whitecaps or Inter Miami, which one will have a player who will have won both a World Cup trophy and a Major League Soccer Cup in their trophy cabinet? One of the teams.
Before the game, not after the game.
After the game.
Well,
Because one of the teams will
Thomas
take
Müller.
the cup and, well, yes. The answer is both teams.
Oh, and Messi,
Whichever team wins, it'll be the first time that a player will have both a World Cup trophy and an MLS Cup in their trophy cabinet. So it's Müller, of course, or Messi, Busquets will have both trophies in their cabinet, depending on who wins. So a lot of firsts are happening at this match on Saturday, and that is preceded by World Cup draw on Friday, which is another event I'm going to, a live watch party for that. So very exciting. Couple of days coming up for me out here in Vancouver. Ben, you had something that you were looking at for the week ahead.
Yeah, so this Thursday, it's the PDC World Darts Championship. Starts. UK listeners will know all about it. Maybe our North American listeners might be less familiar. I can only describe it as an annual debauch, Alexandra Palace in London. People get into fancy dress, lots of festive spirit, shall we say, and rowdy behaviour. And I think the darts, festive spirits, yeah, plural. There's the darts are fairly secondary, so shall we say, to the celebrations. There was a statistic that one of our colleagues shared, which is that there is more beer sold at Alexandra Palace in the 2 weeks of the PDC World Darts Championship than there is at the Munich Beer Festival, which makes you wonder what the Germans are doing. Earlier this week we reported Paddy Power was going to renew as the title sponsor of the darts, and you can see why. It's very, very on brand for them. They're kind of known for their irreverent, playful kind of marketing campaigns. So last year they did, well, in fact, for the last few years, they've earned quite a lot of goodwill. They've done a fundraising campaign for Prostate Cancer UK, and as part of that, they've encouraged burly darts players to talk about examining their prostates. So it's very sort of conjures up a lot of images that you might not want to think about, but very effective campaign, and also very good at distracting you from the fact that they're a betting company. So we're probably, we're expecting them to do something similar this year. So that'd be something to watch out for.
Well, that's what we're looking at for the week ahead. Martin, you had another topic you wanted to talk about. I think you were going to mention the World Cup draw, which is
same topic. Yeah, it was recording on a Thursday. It's coming up tomorrow, which is Friday, or today if you're listening. The fixture announcement is on Saturday when Sky Scanner and Kayak, I hope they've got defences for their websites, because there will be one hell of a amount of traffic going there at that point. I would encourage people to look at the video of the 1994 World Cup draw, which I shared it on X, actually. It was like an account called Stu's Football Flashbacks. Robin Williams was there. There's a lovely juxtaposition of Robin Williams' sort of manic sense of humour and Sepp Blatter's kind of dour, boring Swiss, but trying to be funny. I would never, clearly, not going to sit here and defend Sepp Blatter, but yeah, he does have a go at trying to be funny, and Robin Williams comes on, and it's worth watching. He comes on and puts a rubber glove on, and, well, yeah, there's maybe a a segue to Ben's prostate examination chat there that he makes a joke about. Anyway, I'll let you maybe discover that. What are we looking for draw-wise? I would like, speaking from Scotland's point of view, I quite fancy just a fun group. Brazil, Japan, and Ghana would be great fun. I mean, Brazil, I have so many Brazilians that I know that are just brilliant. Ghana, well, I mean, just would be so colourful and fun and great. And Japan, yeah, I love the Japanese fans, so that'd be great. There's a few different alternatives. I mean, you talk about Oktoberfest beer sales and Paddy Power, the World Darts Champs beer sales. There is a sports event that would eclipse that, which would be a Scotland draw USA, Australia and Ireland, which is possible and would be absolute carnage. I think AB InBev's share price would go through the roof if that happens. There's also a Test cricket group that could happen. We could have England, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, which would be kind of fun. And I asked John what his preference would be, and he said Iran, Panama, and Cape Verde, simply because he wants to play the crappiest teams at all times possible in a tournament, because it's a tournament and he wants to win it. Absolutely fair enough. And also had the news this week that the FIFA World Cup is now made of Lego and can be bought for the sum of £159.99. It does look very cool, to be fair. I'm not sure if there's a 30% FIFA commission on that one, but it is very cool. I would quite like one, but it's far too expensive. I also quite like to see maybe a Jules Rimet and Pickles double, Pickles the dog double, for anybody old enough to remember when the World Cup trophy was lost. There's no Gianni Lego figure, sadly, and there's no Donald Trump figure. They didn't have enough orange bricks for Donald, so there we go.
Great. Well, I think that might just be the point where we wrap up this week's podcast. Thank you both, gentlemen. Some great quirky news there, as usual, and some wonderful insights before on our topics of Real Madrid, the long game, the host city 2025 event that you were at, Martin, and our stadium naming rights section. Thank you both. I'm sure we'll have you, our regulars, back on the podcast in the coming weeks. To our listeners, if you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you know where to go. Take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. And as always, if you enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout, you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. And please, finally, don't forget to share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms. And you can also watch for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, and for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.